Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cannabis Crossroads webinar series, generously supported by the Conference Fund at Memorial University. My name is Dina Gaid, and I am a postdoctoral fellow with the Cannabis Health Evaluation and Research Partnership Team, or CHERP. We are a multidisciplinary team based at Memorial University, funded by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research and the Canadian Centre for Substance Use and Addiction. We have investigators in pharmacy, medicine, education, and psychology, and a wide range of external stakeholders on the advisory panel. Some of those members are here presenting to you today. We will begin today's event with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homeland of the Birek, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homeland of Mi'kmaq and Birtek. We would like also to recognize the Inuit of Nununsiovit and the Nununtukavut, and the Innu of Sinon, and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationship with all the people of this province, as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. Please welcome our facilitator for today, Dr. Jennifer Donnan. Dr. Donnan is an assistant professor in the School of Pharmacy at Memorial. She is one of the principal investigators on the CHERP team. Welcome, Dr. Donnan.
Thank you so much, Dina. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We're really excited to get this Cannabis Crossroads webinar series started. We've been planning it for a number of months now, and yeah, just great that you're here to join us. For those of you who don't know, the CHERP team has been conducting cannabis policy evaluation for the last couple of years now. We started out with a really cross-province needs assessment. We talked to stakeholders, we talked to members of the community to really find out what are the priorities for cannabis policy evaluation for this province. And while that was really influential in setting the agenda for our own research activities, we also heard loud and clear that public education is really important. There's still a lot of misconceptions out there around cannabis. And a lot of learning that needs to be done. And so this event here today and over the next 3 webinars is really our effort to try to provide some of that education to the community. And it will be recorded so that people can access this at a later date. So our list of panelists will be discussing access to cannabis through licensed and unlicensed markets. They'll be talking about some insights into some of the regulations surrounding access and the evolution of the retail market, including adaptations to the regulations over time. So just a few housekeeping items before I pass the mic over to our first speaker. For those of you who are new to WebEx, you should be able to modify the layout in the top of your screen to allow you to change the format that you're viewing. We'll also be using the Q&A function, so you won't see chat after the next couple of minutes. We encourage you to use the Q&A function to post questions to our panelists. Please try to do that as soon as you can. We'll be organizing those in the background and getting them ready for the Q&A session there at the end. And that'll be done by myself and my colleague, Sandy Brennan, who is here on a line today to help out with that. The other thing I want to note is that we encourage any live tweeting. So if you use Twitter and you want to, make any comments on what you've heard here today, please use the hashtag Cannabis Crossroads, and we'll be sure to also share that with our followers. We have 3 incredible speakers here today, which I'm really excited to introduce. First, we have Ryan Hocko. He's the Senior Inspector for the Newfoundland Labrador Liquor Corporation. We have Taylor Giovannini, who's the CEO and President of Oceanic Relief. And we have Paul Seabourn, who's a Management Professor at the University of Virginia. So today's event is going to start with Ryan Hocko. I'll give you a bit of a brief introduction to him and what he does, and then I'll pass the mic over. So Ryan Hocko is a senior inspector for the Newfoundland Labrador Liquor Corporation. He is the lead inspector for the regulation of non-medical cannabis. He has been involved in the development of the provincial cannabis legislation and the regulated retail system since 2018. Currently, his focus is on the interdiction of illegal cannabis, and he obtained his BSc in biology from Memorial University and a graduate diploma in food safety from the Marine Institute. So welcome, Ryan. Thank you for joining us today.
Had you muted there, Ryan?
Here we go. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan. Thanks for attending. I'm just going to go over some of the high-level regulatory aspects of the cannabis industry as it currently stands, and just a brief overview of the way things stand right now. And like Jennifer said, if you have any questions, by all means, use the Q&A function. All right, so what you're looking at here is the current map of licensed retail locations for non-medical cannabis in the province. And just to talk about the hierarchy, Health Canada still licenses and is responsible for all the medical side of the cannabis industry. So anything medical still processes from Health Canada. They're also the lead regulator on all the production facilities within Canada. So while we have some control through our provincial legislation here in the province, for the most part, Health Canada regulates all the producers. Now, since legalization, NLC has taken on the role of the sole distributor of non-medical cannabis for the province. NLC authorizes all of the non-medical cannabis products that you see in any of the retail locations. NLC approves the pricing and the products themselves that go out for retail sale. And we also license the locations themselves, like I mentioned. Very recent development was that NLC has decided to actually take on the warehousing aspects. Prior to this year, the warehousing of cannabis was left to the producers. So everything was producer to retail location or producer to consumer through mail order through our website, Shop Cannabis NL. Now, all the products that go out to the stores or go out on a personal level through website order come from an NLC distribution center. A recent development as well, like I said, NLC had the only legal cannabis website for non-medical retail sale. Since COVID, we've opened up the online sales to some of our tier 1 cannabis stores. So the standalone cannabis stores are able to sell online as well now. All right, a little bit about the stores themselves. When it came to legislation, all the retail locations were divided into tiers. Tier 1 and Tier 2 are referred to as cannabis stores. That's what a person would expect a standalone cannabis store to be. Tier 1 is a totally independent location, cannabis accessories only, and a small amount of other merchandise. Tier 2 cannabis store is basically the same thing, except it's attached to another retail business, except it has its own entrance and exit. Tier 3 is a dedicated cannabis counter within another retail establishment. There's currently only one in the province, and it's kind of modeled after the old, I should say old, the Sears Canada model or the Canada Post model, where they have outlet stores in different retail locations. So it's just a small counter that's dedicated to cannabis only and cannabis accessories. Tier 4 stores are what you'd expect for a standard retail, a convenience store with the sale of cannabis added on. And down below is our new ad campaign. It's only legal if you see the Cannabis NL logo. So that's important for people. I mean, shopping at retail, you will most definitely see the logo on the legitimate retail stores. And same thing appears on our Shop Cannabis NL website. This is just the opening page after you go through age gating. This is the homepage layout. All right, this is just a collection of product photos I put together, so everybody has an idea what the legal products look like, the legal non-medical retail products. They all have standardized labeling like you would expect in any regulated industry, basically. They carry the THC warning symbol across all products. They carry a standard warning in both languages, and they're pretty uniform. When it comes to packaging, most people had complaints about substantial packaging right from the beginning, but it was necessary because the packaging has to be tamper resistant and child resistant. So these are just some of the examples I pulled out of what exists in the industry today. And to go along with that, I've also took out a sampling of the black market type products. So the following half dozen slides or so are black markets products, what you'd see that were sold prior to legalization or shortly thereafter. So as you can see, none of these have anything resembling what the Health Canada dictated for the retail products. And as we kind of weeded out some of the black market products, now we see they're improving their product packaging in the black market to kind of mirror some of the regular retail products now. See, these are black market as well, but they do carry the THC warning symbol, and they have they have some visual appeal to them. They have some limited information as to what the products are and the THC, CBD content, even packaging dates and stuff like that. And some of them carry a sticker that looks like a security tag, but it just isn't. The ones that I've checked from black markets, they just go to a dead web address. These are a sample of the illegal edible products that were out there in the markets. Again, you can see none of these conform to the Health Canada standards that I put up first. Just a selection of different food products. They come in nice shiny packaging, and they look like legitimate products that, well, some of them anyway, that were produced in a factory, not in someone's home. But again, they don't carry any of the packaging or labeling regulations that Health Canada put forward. Again, another selection of different products that we found in the black market. Some shatter, some large bags of gummy type edibles, 1 gram packs of shatter carrying different brands, different logos, different strains, and some jars of concentrates. More products. The ones along the bottom were a major concern for us the past year, because as you can see, they closely resemble legitimate food products when it comes to candy or cheesies and things like that. We quickly seized these and got a media release out right away that these were in the market, just to make sure that parents were aware, and kids wouldn't pick up these things. Vape products, currently they're still under a ban by the provincial governments. NLC doesn't list or approve any vape products, so anything that comes into the province, anything that's sold in the province is not a legitimate vape product as authorized by NLC, so it's illegal. Now, if a person leaves the province and buys a legitimate product in another province, they can bring it back to them under their personal exemption. There's nothing wrong with that. But as it stands, there's no vape products, no cannabis vape products sold in the province. Finally, a different selection of some of the less available products, some topicals, different CBD capsules, and pet products. And on from my current information from Health Canada, nobody in the country is allowed to produce cannabis-containing product for pets. So no oils or anything that are allowed for pet use, and no pet treats containing cannabis. This is the excise stamp for Newfoundland. So on all legitimate retail products, we'll carry one of these stamps, and these are traceable through excise, and they're like verification that your product is legitimate. Yeah, getting on to the provincial regulations. So we have 3 new pieces of legislation when it comes to cannabis, and they were brought in for legalization, and they've been updated a little bit since, but no major changes. So we have our Cannabis Control Act, our Cannabis Control Regulations, and our Cannabis Licensing and Operations Regulations. As I said, NLC has regulatory authority for all non-medical cannabis in the province. NLC authorizes licensed producers to supply cannabis here in the province. And NLC doesn't go out and pick which producers it wants to deal with. It's done through something similar to a public tendering process. It goes out countrywide, and any producer who wants to come here and sell product is able to apply. We have significant powers of retail regulation under the Act and regulations. Our licensed cannabis retailers are all designated high risk, and they're inspected by us a minimum of 8 times per year. We have provisions for compliance testing under legislation when it comes to like sale to young people, so we can actually go in and make sure that our retailers are complying with the regulations. And of course, we have search and seizure powers for contraband, same as any other regulated industry. So a couple of highlights for provincial legislation. No one is permitted to purchase cannabis for delivery from outside the province or personally import cannabis beyond the 30-gram personal possession limit. So what that means is, aside from the websites I mentioned, the Shop Cannabis NL website, or any websites offering sales from our Tier 1 cannabis stores, anything from outside the province is illegal when ordered online. Also, any products that cross over from a medical patient to the non-medical retail industry are considered contraband. So a person who is accessing cannabis for medical purposes cannot provide any of their cannabis to someone for recreational use. So they can't give any plants or seeds or anything from their medical cannabis supply. Under the Act, of course, we have provisions for compliance testing, like I said, so compliance inspections. So, like I said, a minimum of 8 times a year for our retail locations. They're fully inspected by one of our staff. Inspector makes an appointment, goes there, looks at the cannabis, looks at the retail setup to make sure that everything is as it should be under the regulations, and issues directives for corrections if necessary. Seizure of contraband is a big one to cut down on the illegal markets. It was important for us to have significant powers. So when there's reasonable grounds to believe that a person possesses contraband cannabis, we or the police can, without a warrant, stop and detain a conveyance, which includes a parcel or a vehicle, seize the contraband, seize the conveyance or the container where the contraband is located, and any books or records that would provide evidence in court. General prohibitions. A lot of our legislation was carried over from the Federal Cannabis Act. So nationally, the possession limit is 30 grams or less in public, including a vehicle in public. And to go along with that, we brought in that a licensed retailer in the province can only sell 30 grams per transaction. For non-flowering plants, a person can possess a maximum of 4 in public or in their personal residence. Flowering plants are not permitted in public at all, and any unlicensed organization must not possess cannabis within the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. In terms of sales and purchases from our licensed locations, a person must not sell or supply cannabis to a minor. That's pretty obvious. A person without an authorization must not sell to retailers in the province. So any of the companies that are growing cannabis here legitimately, they need to be authorized under provincial legislation to sell into the province. Again, the retail limit is 30 grams. The social sharing aspect comes in there. So a person can share maximum amount of 30 grams with another person who is above the legal age. And a person must not attempt to purchase cannabis from anyone but a licensed retailer. When it comes to minors, the legislation federally was strong, and we kind of merited it ourselves, although it's specified as a minimum of 18 years of age in the federal legislation. The province adopted an age of 19 years. So a person under 19 is prohibited from purchasing or obtaining cannabis or cannabis accessories. They can't give cannabis or accessories to another person. They can't sell it. They can't be an employee of a cannabis store. They can't enter a cannabis store, and there's very clear signage on all of our licensed locations. And they can't handle or have any involvement with cannabis or accessories at any of the retail locations. In terms of retailer restrictions, our retailers can only purchase NLC-approved products, like I said, from any licensed producer. Our retailers can't provide any cannabis or accessories to minors or people who are intoxicated by alcohol or drugs. Can't sell products that are subject to a recall, either through Health Canada or through NLC. And there's no self-service displays or dispensing machines allowed in retailers. So a person just can't walk into any of the retail locations and pick their cannabis or cannabis accessories off a shelf and buy it that way. In terms of consumption, a person must not consume cannabis in any public place, anywhere prohibited by the Smoke-Free Environment Act 2005. So that includes a lot of workplaces and different things. There's a full list in the act itself. Can't consume cannabis in a vehicle or a boat except where it's used as a dwelling. And there's provisions for that, where the vehicle has to be parked on private property with the owner's permission, or a boat has to be moored or anchored offshore. And consumption of cannabis is also not permitted in any place prescribed by regulation, but no other places have been prescribed as yet in regulation. So it's just limited to these. Also, consumption is not permitted in or at a cannabis stores. So no person can enter a store and open up their new jar of cannabis and start consuming it right away. In terms of a vehicle, if you're transporting cannabis in public, you got to keep in mind of the 30-gram limit. Cannabis has to be in its original package with an unbroken seal if it's in the passenger compartment, or it has to be locked up in a trunk, so not readily available to any person. Again, these rules don't apply to vehicles or boats that are used as dwellings, and they don't apply to taxis or buses. I mentioned it before, for bringing cannabis into the province, again, the 30-gram limit when it comes to dried flower or the federal equivalent. So when it comes to edibles or beverages or things like that, you have to be aware to do the conversion on it. And the packaging and labeling was updated, so it makes it easier for a person to determine how much cannabis they actually possess when they're in public. And it has to be from a source or has to be legally obtained. So from a retail store from outside the province or through some other legal means. Proof of age, obviously required for anybody who's buying cannabis from one of our licensed retailers. And our retailers are required to check for ID for anyone who appears under 19. And the only IDs are the same ones that are acceptable for buying alcohol within the province. So government issued photo ID. Provincial legislation has a section to deal with public intoxication. So a person cannot be intoxicated in a public place. When it comes to minors, again, inspectors or police officers can seize cannabis or anything believed to constitute evidence of a failure to comply with the act from a minor. Now, the cannabis control regulation is fairly brief, but one important section is growing of cannabis at home. So under Section 7 of that regulation, it goes over all the conditions where a person can grow at home. It can only be done by persons who are over 19. It's a maximum of 4 plants per dwelling house. It's only in a dwelling house where a person ordinarily resides. Dwelling house in the legislation includes any enclosed buildings and structures on the property, but cannabis plants cannot be grown on the property itself, so no outside growth. Plants must be reasonably inaccessible to minors, and they cannot be visible from any public place, and it cannot be grown from a source of contraband. This is just my contact information. If anybody needs to contact me after the presentation or in the future, I'm a public employee, so my phone number is 724-1277, and feel free to email me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ryan, for leading us through some of the provincial regulations and the situation with access to retail cannabis in this province. Next up, I'm going to introduce Taylor Giovannini. We're going to save all the questions, of course, till the end once all panelists have had a chance to speak. Taylor is the CEO of Oceanic Relief and has honed a passion and knowledge of the cannabis industry since 2017. As CEO, her responsibilities include, but are not limited to, managing the organization's staff, oversight of programs within the organization, and expansion of the organization, and the infusion of the company's mission into every function and aspect of the business. She was one of the first to the table when it came to proposing a facility that could grow cannabis right here in this province, and she holds a BBA from Memorial University. Welcome, Taylor. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Just one second while I get my presentation going. Can everyone see this?
All good.
All good. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. That was extremely informative on how Newfoundland has rolled out the privatization of recreational cannabis. We are extremely excited and lucky to live in Newfoundland, to have this opportunity to create a cannabis experience rather than a transaction. So yeah, first and foremost, my name is Taylor Giovannini. I'm the president of Oceanic Relief. We're a licensed producer. So we actually converted a fish plant down on the Burin Peninsula in Burin into a cannabis cultivation facility. We've been growing now since February, and it's been just a roller coaster of a ride, and it's amazing. So since then, well, not since then, December last year, we opened our flagship store here in Burin. And we've opened 2 since. So we have 3 in total, and we still have 5 more left to open across Newfoundland. And we're just thrilled to be a brand that Newfoundlanders can be proud of, and hopefully get all the education and knowledge they need when they enter into our store. So yeah, I'm just gonna run through essentially how all of our stores are a Tier 1 store. So just to recap, Tier 1 is a standalone store that allows, so only, of course, 19 plus, it's age gated. But the reason why we went with Tier 1 was to allow the most ability for consumers to come in and to be educated by the staff. So I'll just go through the next few slides are what our stores look like. And as Ryan mentioned, the cost of product in Newfoundland is the same across the board. So in all retail stores, and I believe there's 33 or 34 at the moment in Newfoundland, if you buy a cannabis product, say one of our seaweed products, it's the same price in our store as it is at a Spirit Leaf in St. John's or at a Loblaws Sea Shop. So that really creates the ability for cannabis stores or LCRs, licensed cannabis retailers, to create the experience that consumers will want to have. So as you can see, Oceanic really prides itself on creating a very comfortable and approachable atmosphere. One of the main things that that I realized when I entered into this industry was the fact that the stigma was still there for me and for a lot of other people. You know, you don't know until you educate yourself on the cannabis industry. So I wanted to create a space that allowed consumers to go in and be like, oh, this doesn't look like a cannabis store. So it just allows them to feel more comfortable, which in turn allows them to ask the questions that they need to ask, or at least talk to our bud tenders so they can give them the proper information. So we just really wanted to create an approachable and inviting atmosphere. This is our flagship store in Buren. So we created a cafe space because we also sell coffee at this store. We sell Gross Morn coffee. We sell Gross Morn Roasters coffee, which is an added thing. And I'll get into why we chose to sell coffee, but this is the space that we like to use to educate people. We do 101 Cannabis 101 nights there. So we invite the public and the community there to just chat about cannabis. One of the things that we can do, or, you know, an example would be how to speak to your children about cannabis, or how to properly consume, ways to consume, how to properly roll a joint, what to do if you've consumed too much, those type of things. I really wanted to create a space and an environment so people didn't feel like the questions they were asking were silly or stupid, because I felt that way. So I wanted to answer those questions before they even thought of them. So yeah, you know, it's meaningful connections that we want to create with this retail experience instead of just a transaction. So we've created the space for all ages, from 19 up to, you know, that's my mother. she'll really appreciate that. She's 65 and she feels comfortable going into this space. So here's just another view of it. I'm sorry, this slide is not really working, but I just wanted to, this is just ways to safely purchase cannabis. So with a tier 1 store, we have a lot of different options on how to purchase cannabis. The first and foremost would be the in-store purchase. So this is our preferred way. We always invite our customers to come on in, because we really just want to have that one-on-one time with them to ensure that once they get a product, that they're leaving with as much information as possible, so they don't go home and have a bad experience. Yeah, and as Ryan mentioned, we also have online purchase. You can purchase online through Shop Cannabis NL, which is amazing. But as a tier 1 store, we are also allowed to have an online presence. So through this method, you know, I've mentioned stigma before, but I really, this way we can have almost an order ahead, so you can pick up in the store. You can have curbside delivery or mail out. And then we've also, and I'll get into it in the next slide, we also created, we were the first cannabis retailer in Canada, actually, to have drive-through service. Yeah, so it's pretty awesome, and we're really proud of that. I hope Newfoundland's proud of it too, because we're, you know, put Newfoundland on the map there. But I mean, who would have ever thought that this is a way that you could, you know, it's beautiful. The website is gorgeous, and it's extremely easy and informative how to purchase. And our POS systems that we use, point of sale systems that we use, automatically help with the regulations. So all of our, of course, there's only a limit of 30 grams per transaction. So, you know, there's a safeguard in all of our systems to ensure that, you know, no purchase over 30 grams is even allowed. Also, age gating side of that too. You know, we physically check the IDs, but this system also allows us to scan the IDs just to ensure that everything is the ID is proper and everyone's of age. So yeah, I just want to talk about the drive-through a little bit, and I think that the drive-through is not only revolutionary, but it's a way. I guess the passion behind me wanting to have a drive-through was for a lot of reasons, and it fills a lot of boxes. But essentially, what started it was, you know, I'm a mother, and as we all know, you know, it's 19 plus in these areas. Not that I want to bring my child in there, but I do want to access safe and responsible cannabis. So, you know, I can speak to a lot of parents that when your children are young, it's really difficult to be without them. You know, and as it stands right now, we are allowed to, you know, bring them into a liquor store. Not that I like to compare it to liquor, but we're allowed to bring them into liquor store. And, you know, as, you know, I just teach my son that, hey, you know, liquor or beer is an adult thing to do. So I really pushed for this to be an option for parents. It also checked off a lot of other boxes that helped with the stigma. You know, I do recognize and accept that the stigma still lives in cannabis, and a lot of consumers would rather not be seen in a cannabis store. So I wanted to create that other option and space for people to avail of safe and responsible and legal cannabis. So that's the other reason why we really pushed for the drive-through. It was tricky, but we got through to it. Which leads me to, as you can see in the slide, we also sell coffee. The main reason behind the coffee was, well, not only is coffee, something that everyone can kind of relate to, but my thought process behind coffee was, if I can get a bum in a seat or someone to sit down to have a cup of coffee, I can properly educate them. My biggest fear in the retail side of things was, if someone came in nervously, just picked up a product and went home and had a bad experience. So I just really wanted to educate every consumer coming in, because I truly believe that most consumers are either uneducated or new. So, people aren't going to know what to do if you smoke too much, or even how to even start, and we always, the motto is go slow. Hang on, I can't even remember it, but we just say take a couple puffs if you're starting with consuming a joint, and just wait, put it out. The biggest myth or funny thing is, there's this lighted joint, so people feel this pressure to kind of smoke it all, and that's not the case at all. So we really just try to educate people on these things. Here's another view of our flagship store in Buren. We also have a drive-through in Port aux Basques. So just to go through the stores that are open right now for us, we have one in Buren, which services the full Buren Peninsula. We have one open in Port aux Basques, which services Port aux Basques area, and that also has a drive-through. And then we just opened our St. John's East store, which is super exciting. We're having a grand opening on Saturday. So yeah, normalizing cannabis, that was the other kind of passion behind coffee. Was, I just really wanted to normalize, and the more normal cannabis becomes, the more comfortable people will feel about asking those questions. And it's important to me, as I feel this is a new consumer product, so it's everyone's responsibility, but especially mine and Oceanics, to portray that and to allow people to have access to all that information. Okay, so getting down to the actual products and how to properly read a label. Because I mean, you look at this label and it's there's a lot going on. As you can see in the top left-hand corner, that's the THC, warning label. the actual, advertised space is seaweed there, and that's very, very small. Everything else are just information on the actual product, some warning labels from Health Canada. There's 8 of those that have to rotate. There's obviously only one right here. On the bottom right-hand corner is the company's name if you do have any type of product defaults or information that you need. And then the interesting part, what everyone's really motivated by, is the THC level. So that is also a little bit, to me, it's a little bit difficult for people to understand or read, mainly because the industry is driven by percentages of THC or CBD that's in the product, but on the actual label, it is labeled as milligrams per gram. So the first line there, THC, which reads 9.90 milligrams per gram, is the live THC. And how you convert that to a percentage, you just move the decimal over. So it's actually 0.9% of live THC as the flower stands. And this is actually pre-roll here. So as the flower that's in the pre-roll stands, if you somehow consume that, you would have a 0.9% THC in that. The total THC value, which is right underneath 222.95 milligrams per gram, is the total THC once it's heated to 150 degrees or higher. So that is what most people are really after. And again, if you move the decimal, it's 22.29% THC levels. And same thing with the CBD, the live THC is 0.03% if you move the decimal, and total CBD once combusted or heated is 1.3 milligrams per gram, which is 0.1%. So you can see how this is a little bit overwhelming for a lot of consumers have had to properly read it. So we, on our menu systems in the store, we really try to break it down in percentages so they understand it properly. This is for whole flower. And I'll show you the next label is actually for edibles or some sort of edible product. So this is just taken off the Health Canada website. So Health Canada came back. When was this? This is 2020, December. It was Cannabis 2.0, they called it. And it was when they allowed edibles into the market. Of course, edibles are, Brian Hocko showed you a lot of the illegal edibles, and a lot of the illegal edibles have, to me, astronomical amounts of THC or milligrams of THC in them. So Health Canada, they had to start somewhere, and a lot of people were really upset, but they came out with a maximum of 10 milligrams per package. Now, I fully support this because edibles are a different beast, and it's a different way to consume, and really the science behind it, even if you're not a scientist, which I'm not, but when you consume it by inhalation, you're consuming it through your lungs. When you eat it, you're actually metabolizing it through your liver. So it takes longer, and then it also lasts longer. So oftentimes consumers will double dose before it actually takes into effect, and that's, typically a problem. So, any legal recreational product is 10 milligrams maximum per package. And as you can see there in the white, it lists off the milligrams of THC and CBD. So it is what it is. If there's one gummy in there, then it's 10 milligrams. If there's 2 gummies, it's normally 5 and 5, and it will depict or it will actually say there if it's if there's one piece or 2 piece. So education services, I talked a lot about how, that's the big motivation behind us, Oceanic, having tier 1 stores, because we really just want to educate people. But there's definitely things that we can and cannot say. Mainly what we can say is very factual information. And I've and how-tos, how to or suggestions on how to start slow. Just take a couple puffs, or if they do have a gummy that's 5 milligrams, we often even tell them to split it. Those type of things. We just caution consumers on just taking it slow, just so they can feel it themselves and dose properly themselves. Things we cannot provide, which is it's very difficult because a lot of consumers don't understand that recreational, licensed cannabis retailers are recreational only, and we are not medical. We cannot talk at all about any of the medical, anything medical about cannabis, any of the side effects, or we cannot suggest any type of effects that different strains may have on you. So that does present some just struggles within, as bud tenders or as the actual retailer, because you can imagine a lot of consumers just come in, oh, I have a bad hip and my doctor said this, or my friend told me this. So, I'm pretty sure at all of our retail locations, we have just a few sayings that we say over and over. Hi, sorry, ma'am or sir, we can't talk medical, but I can tell you about this product, and we suggest you do your own research. So yeah, it does present some issues, but we can absolutely tell you how to actually consume it, or different ways that we can consume. The main thing is, when a customer comes into the store, we ask them, hey, do you know what you're looking for? If they don't, then we ask them, have they tried it before? Which ways would they like to consume? We usually can narrow it down in like 30 seconds. Someone may say, no, I don't want to smoke at all. So then obviously that leaves us to, either eating it some way or shape or form. So we just go from there. So which, yeah, exactly, leads me to ways that you can consume. This is just kind of a pie chart on the percentages of what people consume. When legalization of cannabis 2.0 or edibles came out, we all, or the industry depicted that, or they thought that it would switch to mostly edibles. But we're still seeing like a huge percentage of dried flower being consumed, either by vaporizing it, smoking it in a joint, in a bong, or any type of other accessories. That is the majority of how you consume. But other than that, tinctures, which is, a lot of people don't even know what tinctures is. It's oil. So, if people are looking for oil, that's tinctures. Drinks are now possible, but again, in Canada and in Newfoundland, is 10 milligrams per package. Vaporizers, like Ryan Hako mentioned, we are one of 2 provinces actually who have banned the vape pens, the preloaded vape pens, but we do allow the sale of the accessory. So we can sell an actual vaporizer, and you can put your actual your flower in there, which is a really good way to consume. And I suggest this because it's a lot easily dosed properly. You don't have that pressure as a lit joint to just consume. You can just turn off your machine. Topicals is to me is a very exciting and rising in our stores. At least we see. So it's just the THC or the CBD is used topically, so you just put it on your body. Capsules, of course, is very similar to tinctures, but it's in a capsule amount. They are usually in forms of 2.5 milligrams per capsule, or 5, depending on the brand, but it's very clearly stated, and it's a great way to dose properly. And then edibles. So this can come in chocolates, gummies. Yeah, but again, they're 10 milligrams per package. And of course, there's limited amount on our website, and it's very clear what's legal and what's not. Ryan showed a lot of these packages, which are extremely concerning. I remember seeing the Cheetos, and I have a 6-year-old, and that's super concerning to me because, of course, I wouldn't even know if that was if that was laced with cannabis or not. So I'm glad that Health Canada has come out with very plain packaging and child-resistant packaging. So with every consumption method, this is where we can educate. So this is the education that we give to all of our consumers. With every consumption method, there's different onsets and different effects, or how long it actually takes into effect. So combustion or vaporizing. So this is physically lighting up a joint or a bong or combusting it. So it can be instant. You can feel the actual effects instant, or it could take up to 15 minutes. But the effects is from 2 to 4 hours. So I usually, especially with first-time consumers, I prefer to kind of suggest them towards this side of it, because if they don't like it, then at least it's over quicker and they can feel the onset quicker, so they can dose properly. Ingesting it is another really good way, but the problem with ingesting it, and there's companies getting better at this, and I'll touch on this in a second, is that like I mentioned before, you're metabolizing it through your liver, similar to how you would metabolize alcohol. But it takes upwards to 3 hours for it to actually take into effect. And once it takes into effect, it can be anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. So again, this is troubling when someone, 3 hours in said, well, that did nothing, and they take another one. And then, oh no, you can't really take that back. Sublingual. This is a way that you can actually, so if you're ingesting, for example, oils that's out of a dropper, this is a way that you can cut that onset down a little bit. If you actually put underneath your tongue and just allow it to kind of absorb there, the onset is quicker, and the effects will take 2 to 6 hours. Topical. I couldn't really find a whole lot of information on this, but just personally, you can find the effects can take up to, instant to like half an hour, and it can last a few hours. So the other thing that we really wanted to touch on here were myths and facts, and I think that I'll talk about a few things, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions on this. So the two biggest things that I really wanted to touch on was the myth about THC. Right now, this industry is very THC driven. That is the guide. People believe, and the industry or someone believes that you won't get high or you won't get any effects unless it's 20% THC, which is not the case at all. And that's the other beautiful thing about having tier 1 stores and Oceanic having that platform across Newfoundland. I really want to educate people that you don't need 20% THC to feel any effects. I mean, it's like starting to run for the first time. You're not going to start off as a marathon runner. You have to start slow. So we really try to educate people. And even now, I'm starting to get to even consumers who've been consuming for years, and teaching them that, hey, a 12% or even an 8%, and they're like, wow, that's really good. And the reason being is that there's more to the cannabis plant than THC. There's 100 other properties, including THC, but the one that is really left behind, and we have started to implement it actually on our labels, is the terpene profile. So if people, terpenes are found in all of our foods. It's the essential oil of a plant. And I'll just give you one example, because a lot of people understand this. Lavender, for example. Everyone, or I guess the marketing side of things, but a lot of people know that lavender is a very calm and relaxing scent. That lavender, the actual flower, has terpene called linalool. They're all really funny names. But that exact terpene is found in a lot of cannabis plants. So again, you can take that same terpene and educate people on the terpene profiles, and they can then judge what type of feeling they want to have or effects they want to have when they consume. Yeah, and the lower THC, a lot of people think, oh, it's not going to do anything, but you know, really, how I try to educate a lot of people is that, like, well, what do you want to do? I mean, do you want to have a good time, or do you want to not remember? So, you know, I just really try to educate people on, like, well, this is a good time. You know, I guess you know, comparing it to the alcohol industry, I'm sure when alcohol first became legal, or the ban was off, it was very driven by high alcohol percentages. Now, you know, what's driven is a fine wine, which is 12% compared to your, you know, 50% London Dock. So I do believe that this will even out. It's just, we're still very in the infancy of this industry. And the other myth and fact that I really just wanted to portray is the you know, I guess the view on how it will make you. You know, I pride myself on not looking like a stoner or not looking like the stigma. And, you know, people have this thought that if you consume cannabis, then you'll just be a couch potato. You'll eat a lot and, I don't know, be stupid. But really, there's so many people using it to elevate their life in so many different ways. I personally use it to work out. I use it to clean my house. There's different ways. Meditation, it elevates pretty much anything that you really want to designate your time to. So yeah, I just, you know, Oceanic is going across Newfoundland as a retailer to educate people and to really change the face and normalize cannabis. And I'll just leave all the rest for questions at the end. But yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Taylor. That was excellent. A really great overview of the retail experience that that customers can expect in your store and in, I guess, any store where they can purchase cannabis. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Next up, I'm going to introduce Professor Paul Seabourn. So he's joining us. He's a management professor at the University of Virginia, who has focused on the marijuana and cannabis industry since 2011, including publishing one of the first ever teaching classes or cases on the industry and creating the first ever Business of Marijuana course. Professor Seabourn's involved in a variety of teaching, research, consulting, and expert witness projects, and frequently appears in the media and cannabis-related topics. And he is originally from Corner Brook, Newfoundland, so he has a connection to this province as well. So welcome, Paul, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and really happy to share a little bit of a different perspective. So I think both Ryan and Taylor did a great job of updating on what's been happening in Newfoundland, but also I think covering a lot of the key aspects of safety. And so what I'm going to do is try to provide some examples from some other locations, and then maybe some thoughts as to where there's some room for improvement. So in terms of the 4 big lessons learned, I think the first one has been touched on by our previous speakers, but you know, it seems very clearly from a variety of locations that having people use legal cannabis has a lot of safety advantages over the alternatives, you know, for a lot of the reasons that are shown here. But then I think the second point is maybe one where there's sometimes some misunderstanding or maybe like a overly narrow focus. So some people are very concerned about what's being sold, and if they're comfortable with the safety of the product, they kind of feel like safety has been addressed. Maybe other people are more concerned about what's happening in the retail store, the way Taylor described the experience at her locations, and maybe not thinking as much about the types of the products. But I think also sometimes we also may overly focus or not enough focus on who the buyer is and kind of what their experience is. So I think to have a truly safe access, you want to make sure all 3 of those are well addressed. And then, you know, my view would be that there's no particular state or province or country that's really the clear leader in this area, right? So it's much more of a situation where you have some best practices in different places, but really not a particular place to point to. And as a result, I think there's lots of both need for improvement and opportunity for improvement in terms of safe access. So just back to this first point about legal cannabis being safer, I think everyone who's part of this webinar is probably already thinking along these lines, but I think for some people still their idea of the alternative to legal access is that there's no access, right? So if we can make access as hard as possible through legal methods, that's safer. But when you think about generally people who want to get cannabis having other options, that's where I think the legal option really stands clear. And Ryan did a great job of showing just how easy and how widespread the legal options are if people don't have access to something legal. And it's not only cannabis too. They may choose to consume alcohol in a certain way, or opioids, or some other substance, harder drugs. And so again, those are reasons why making the legal option accessible to people seems to be a safe approach. And I think there's also a more specific comparison between legal and illicit cannabis. And so I was just going to mention a very recent study out of New Brunswick where they sampled both 5 or 6 different illegal products and then 4 legal products from their market. And the conclusion, some of them are not surprising. I think, as Ryan mentioned, the labeling and packaging requirements are pretty strict for Health Canada, and you're not going to get that with the illicit products. But also contaminants, things that are really not something that a consumer can be sure about, were not found in any of these legal products and were found in the other products. There's also that ability to track and trace the way we would with a product in the grocery store that has a recall. But I think probably most interesting to me was very specific findings that you can see here on the chart, that the claimed potency for the legal products was quite accurate, so between 88 to 100%. And many of these illicit products, again to Ryan's examples, claim some sort of level of THC, but the ranges were much more inaccurate, from 43% to 73%. So again, I think that speaks to the value of the legal market. So then if we switch into this kind of what, where, and who, the things that I'm thinking about in terms of what's being sold are the product forms, which we've heard lots about already, these rules around potency and quantity, etc. Then, with the location, it's not just, the retail experience that Taylor focused on, but also are there not any sort of public or social consumption options, and also, the delivery mail options, which many of you in Canada may take for granted, but we in the US definitely do not. And then I think on the who side, as Taylor was describing, there's lots of different use cases for cannabis, and each of those could have a different requirement for having safe access. And then there's the age limits and just the general theme of education. So I think one thing I always say to people about the more robust, longer standing legal markets in a place like Colorado is that it's like walking into a mini grocery store. And I think that's now starting to become the case more and more in Canada too. And so that in itself, creates both opportunities that people can find the right product for the right need, and not just have to always go for flower or a limited option, but also a big challenge in terms of education and the onset and things that Taylor talked about. And I think also, there is this idea that other forms are becoming more popular, but similar to Taylor's chart, this is a sales chart showing that in the US, right into projections for 2022, flower is still expected to be by far the biggest, most popular category. And then they actually have 8 or 9 other categories here that are all, have some demand, but definitely smaller than flower. And I think it's interesting to look at vape pens, which, as was mentioned, are not available in Newfoundland. Actually, the second most popular category across the U.S. Right. So again, if those are not available legally, it makes you wonder where people are going to get access. And then when we talk about the potency and quantity rules, so there's actually good discussion already of the Canada rules. And just for comparison, it's very complicated, I think, wherever you go, right? And as a traveler or a tourist, you could really get a bit confused. So in Colorado, if you're buying flower, they'll limit you to 1 ounce or 28 grams if you're in the adult use market. But if you were a citizen with the medical card, it'll be 2 ounces, potentially even more with approval. And then we have a different approach to edibles in Colorado in that instead of 10 milligrams per package, you can have 10 milligram servings in a package that has up to 10 of those, so 100 milligrams in a package. So that tube that you see there of gummies would be allowed to have 10 milligram gummies, or more if they have lower THC per item. And that was something that was not in place when Colorado legalized, but very quickly was put in place, and it's now been that way, unchanged since 2014. Seems to be working quite well. And then if you get into concentrates and shatter and all these other forms, it can vary, medical versus rec, state versus state. So yeah, it's a very varied approach there. And then in terms of packaging and labeling, you saw the Canadian packaging, but just to show you some other examples. So Colorado also, as a new state, really had to learn on the job in terms of how to label and particularly treat some of these edible forms. So you see on the far left the cookie with the actual THC logo on it, and you can see in the small photo, the photo I took when we were touring this facility, where they use a Hitachi laser to actually burn that onto the cookie or the brownie. And then meanwhile, if you have a beverage, you can't really label the liquid. So it's all about labeling the package and making sure that top, like you see with these Dixie products, is childproof. And then in the top right, you see again the consistent thing of 10 milligrams per serving, but then 100 milligrams per container. And that's a California package, slightly different than the Colorado package. And then, price and quality also are a factor, because again, if the legal market is not price competitive or people don't perceive the quality to be there, then they're likely to go elsewhere. And I think all we can say about this graph on the left is that price is very dynamic in Canada, right? You've had generally prices coming down since legalization and as the markets evolve, but it depends where you're buying, depends if you're on the medical or adult use side. And then on the right, you just see a comparison of the first 2 years in the Saskatchewan market versus Colorado. And from a safety point of view, I guess you'd look at the retail density. So it's easier for, there's more retail options for Coloradan residents than in Saskatchewan after 2 years. And the price compared to the illicit market was much closer to the illegal price in Colorado, much more expensive compared to the legal market in Saskatchewan. And so I'm going to argue those are important safety concerns as well. And then in terms of the where, I guess particularly the retail side, it's really an interesting question as to how many locations does a particular region need. So in Colorado, we currently have about 1,000 medical or recreational locations for 6 million residents, but the city of Denver has actually capped that at a fairly low number. And then recently, Oklahoma offered a medical market, so they have no full adult use market, but with only 4 million residents, they currently have 2,415 medical dispensaries. So it's really the Wild West in Oklahoma. It's probably going to come down, but the early market is supporting that. And then where I currently live in the state of Virginia, we have literally only 5 dispensaries on the medical side for 8.5 million residents, and we're just moving into adult use. So I think all those points of comparison in the US kind of help us give some context for looking at Canada. And I guess another way people like to look at it sometimes is like how many of the cannabis stores relative to a Starbucks or a McDonald's. And I can speak to having lived in Denver and seeing that there were definitely more retail marijuana stores than Starbucks. Not quite the same in Seattle, and kind of neck and neck in Alaska. So thinking about Canada, when the first rollout of cannabis took place, it was interesting to see how different provinces took different approaches. And the color coding here are the reddish provinces where it's only the Crown Corporation selling, the green where there's private retailers, and then only really two places that have a mix. Newfoundland is one and BC the other. And then Nova Scotia, for the most part, being the only one that has Crown Corporation stores with the alcohol and cannabis side by side on the same shelf, but Newfoundland, as Ryan said, has some different flavors, which are a little more creative than some of the other provinces. Early on, hopefully you remember a lot of the discussion about Ontario having very few retail stores for its population. And in May of 2019, Newfoundland had by far the most cannabis stores based on its population, and you can see that here. But I think that in some ways Ontario was woefully short, and so that eventually has been changed. And so in Ontario now, there are many more stores. They went from 110 to 572 just during the year 2020, and those are now closer to where people live. And so they're closing the gap with the other provinces. But yeah, it's more than just the retail option. So in various US states, there's been a lot of demand for public or social consumption options, not just for tourists, but also people that live in an apartment building or have roommates. And so it's only really just getting started now, many years after legalization, to see what you see on the far left, which would be in Las Vegas. Very recently, approval for tasting rooms. In Colorado, they've had this sort of gray market option of going on a tourism bus. It's unclear if that's really public or permitted. And there's lots of interest in like a place to stay where you can actually consume. And again, if those are not available, puts the onus on people to go somewhere else or maybe do something that's less safe. And again, I think Canada is actually, setting the standard in terms of having not just mail-order options, but now probably more widespread delivery options, which are in some places in the U.S., like California, which has Ease, which you see here with their, not every bus looks like that, but one of them does. But yeah, it's been slower to be available in the U.S. definitely than Canada. And then last but not least, I guess I wanted to make sure that we don't overlook the who side. I think Taylor spoke to this a lot. So even if you have great safe access in terms of the products and the locations, different people have very different needs, and even classifying users as being medical users or wellness users or recreational users, that's kind of inexact, and the same person may have different needs, from one week or one day to the other. So it really matters, if we're setting age limits and verifying those, and then if we can educate the consumer. And I think on the age verification side, Ryan would know the situation from Newfoundland, but I know in Colorado, cannabis stores have actually outperformed alcohol stores in terms of the secret shopper test. And it's very, very rare to hear of a dispensary selling to an underage person because the cost of that business in terms of losing a license or the penalty is extremely high. So that's a good thing, but I think there's still many other challenges, particularly around knowledge and education. So I guess to summarize what I see, is that there are some pros to the U.S. model, but it's really, certain states, right? Certain states have good access, lots of products, good testing. Nationally, really, it's kind of more hit or miss, and it's still federally legal. There's no mail order. CBD and hemp exist, but they're not really regulated. And then in Canada, there are a lot of really strong aspects to the program, that it's consistent across the country. You have these additional delivery options. There's at least some connection to traditional, medicine and physicians and pharmacists. And also some of these provinces are regulating cannabis and alcohol together, and that gives me some hope that they can be viewed more collectively. But obviously the product availability is still perhaps a little lower than in the US. The low THC limits on edibles, I think from a serving point of view has a lot of merit, but it also is complicated if you're trying to purchase in terms of packaging. And there's also the price competitiveness versus the illicit market. And a lot of that is not actually within the province's control, it's really Health Canada. So I think everywhere is having some challenges around competing with the illicit market, and then these kind of really complicated things that smart people are struggling to solve in terms of impaired driving, cannabis in the workplace, et cetera. And it's not that there's no research on cannabis, but I do think the researchers are having to try to catch up to the market with new product forms and new populations consuming. So just to close, I would say, a lot of the what aspects are outside of Newfoundland's control. But on the where, I think there's a pretty positive story in terms of accessibility and some of the creative options that Ryan described. But it's still a challenge in a very spread out province with low population density. And each province has to fight its own battles in terms of educating people about the legal options versus what else. So I'll just leave it on this slide to say I think there's lots of room for improvement, and happy to chat more about any of these ideas, and really appreciate the chance to be part of this discussion. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was an excellent and insightful presentation into some of the issues facing in the US market and comparing those to Canada. It left me with lots of questions. So I think we're going to start our panel discussion here now. We have a lot of questions queued up. I'll just wait till we can bring all our panelists onto the screen. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So we have a lot of questions here. Maybe I'll just start with a question to each of you, and I have some that maybe we can pose to all three of you. So the first one I have here is for Ryan. You mentioned that packaging has been bulky. We actually heard this a lot. We've been doing a lot of focus groups and interviews with consumers and the public. It's a really big issue people are facing. I've even heard from some people saying, usually the cannabis consumer is a very environmentally conscious person, and these bulky packages are problematic for them. Is there a way, or do you see this changing, that we can still have a safe package that's child resistant, that maybe is more environmentally friendly? There's got to be lots of talk about that in the industry.
that doesn't fall under our mandates, under provincial mandate. That's all handled federally under the Cannabis Act and Health Canada. And unfortunately, they had to do it the way they did it. I mean, they just left it to the licensed producers to say, here's our requirements. You have to have a childproof packaging that's tamper resistant, and it's up to you to find it and present it to us, at least this is my understanding, for your cannabis packaging. So all the companies went out, they did the research, they found out what was available that they could package pre-rolls or dry cannabis or whatever the product was, the oil gel caps or the oil itself. And they found the specific packaging that worked for them, and that's what they used. And in terms of the bulkiness, I mean, it can only be reduced so much before you remove the effectiveness of the packaging to be child resistant or tamper proof.
Exactly. It's a good point. And I don't know if anybody else has a comment on that. If you see this changing or evolving in any way, Taylor?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, this has been a challenge for licensed producers for sure. I mean, I've been with my company, we've been racking our brains of how we can be environmentally conscious and reduce on packaging. But like Ryan said, there are regulations, and we need to ensure that first and foremost children are safe and that it's child resistant. So what we have adopted is the path of least resistance. I don't necessarily want to package something 3.5 grams of cannabis and 30 grams of plastic. So we're actually reverting to what's the easiest way, or the not worse option. So we do a Mylar bag, which is only a few grams of plastic. Our partners, Aqualitas, they've adopted recycled C plastic. So there's definitely more companies coming on board that is, compostable or recycled plastic. But again, this comes with a cost. So it's this game that we're playing because, of course, we need to be competitive with the black market and in the legal market. So if our packaging goes up, then our price to our consumers ultimately just goes up. So it's just this fine balance that we have to do. So yeah, it's challenging for sure.
I would say that the two areas for these rules to evolve without sacrificing the safety concerns. One is if there's an openness by Health Canada to differentiate between the serving and then the package, right? So you have a chocolate bar in some of our US states where each serving is individually wrapped, and then the package itself has maybe 10, but the package is still childproof. And then the other would be, you see some markets where they treat the medical options differently than adult use. So there might be a 10 milligram limit on the adult use, but if you're a medical card holder buying through a medical source, and you have approval for higher potency, then you might get some additional options. Because again, if someone is a regular user and they're needing 80, 90 milligrams for a particular medical application, right now the packaging and just the purchase transaction volume of that is definitely an issue. But it's going to take time, I think. And Ryan's right. There's not much the province can do on this.
No, but we may see some changes in the future in terms of what we see and how things are packaged. Actually, a point that Taylor made there is a nice segue to this next question, I think, for Paul, because, she mentioned about, it's this balancing act because, if you get these more environmentally friendly packages, you're increasing your costs. That has to go to then the end consumer. You mentioned in your presentation that in the US, the legal products are sold for prices much closer to the prices found on the unlicensed market. So how did the US, how were they able to achieve this parity? And do you have advice maybe for the Canadian market on how we can reach more of a parity to make it safer so that people are driven more to that legal market?
So I think actually it varies a lot even from state to state. So Colorado, which is the market I know well from living there for 8 years, has gotten probably much closer to that price point. And I think the ingredients that they have that some other states don't are allowing for a lot of producers and competitors. So it's a pretty wide open market. There are a lot of people competing for the medical or recreational consumer. There's no one retailer that has more than 15 or so locations out of the hundreds and hundreds that I mentioned. But there will be other states where it's actually not the case at all. So yeah, I think having that level of competition is helpful. But then it's also, I think the biggest factor would be behind the scenes, what's imposed on the supply chain to get it to the consumer's counter, right? So if the producers in Canada are paying, fairly high excess taxes to Health Canada, that's all being passed through to what the consumer sees at Taylor's store or anywhere else. And there's a variation of that burden in other states as well. So how much it costs for them to operate, actual taxes put on, and then any other taxes that local or provinces add on as well. So it's got to be a little bit of all those things. And again, you're balancing the need to regulate the industry. You need funds to do that, and it makes sense to tax the industry to provide some of those. But if you go too far, then you're pushing people away from legal products. You're muted, I think.
Thanks. Thank you for that, Paul. All right. So my next question, I think I will maybe just shift directions a little bit, go to Taylor. As someone who's directly interacting with customers, you talked a lot about stigma and the role that plays. I don't know if you want to speak to a bit more about stigma and how that's influencing where and how people are purchasing cannabis.
Well, thankfully it's changing. And I think that, the ability to have, these tier one stores in Newfoundland, especially, it's like, with the cost being the same right across the board, it's really the consumer's choice. What experience do they want to have? Do they want, it's like shopping for clothes. Do you want to go to, I don't know, this store or that store? So I'm creating this space, which is light and airy and comfortable. While, I don't know, Spirit Leaf is creating this really warm wood kind of feel. So, but again, every store can be as beautiful as you want, and it doesn't look like the stigma. But stigma did play a role in how we rolled out our stores. We're still seeing it in different areas. We've just, like I said, we opened up a store in Port aux Basques, and we're noticing there in that area, the stigma is very real. So we have to approach it differently in every single area. But the drive-through has really been proven to allow consumers they might not have a stigma about actually consuming itself, but they have a stigma or a concern if someone else views them in that actual store. So it's this juggling act, but providing different ways that people can actually purchase it legally is the key to that. So right now in Newfoundland, of course, we can do mail outs, we can do delivery, you can order ahead online and go through the drive-through, pick it up in store, curbside. There's all the options to be as discreet as you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely heard from other people that we've been talking to as part of our own research that, stigma is changing, but it's a huge barrier to people in a lot of ways. I mean, maybe just a follow-up question to that. I mean, you are one of the first stores to offer a drive-through and mail order delivery. How much of your, I guess, business goes through those channels, or is it still primarily in the store? Like, has that really opened up your business up, how
Yeah,
much you can sell?
I can definitely speak to our flagship store in Buren. And I guess the drive-through also came pretty key in this global pandemic that we were dealing with. It allowed, normal consumers or consumers that wanted to come into the store, once we were actually closed, because it was only curbside for a while, to still have access. So since then, at first it was about 50-50 at our Buren store. But now we're seeing it push the other way. So it's 60 to 70% sometimes, because the returning customers know what they want. They don't necessarily need to go into the store. So it's just the convenience of the drive-through, which we all know and love at times. So they know exactly the product that they want, and they're just reusing that service.
Yeah, good point. So, I mean, they can come into the store to get the education up front, and then these other, channels allow them to
Yeah.
get, I guess, quicker
And
access.
we also use the drive-through. So if we're, there's obviously limitations on our drive-through. We can't present a menu, of course, because anyone can see it. So we age gate that. We use a QR code, which our website is then age gated. But say if there's we'll say a nervous customer, we just ask them to come to the front window, and then we talk to them through the window, or give them a menu to kind of sit in their car and then come back around. But if we see that this customer is unsure, we always suggest they come into the stores. Come on in, we'll have a chat and go from there.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
My next question is for Ryan, and I'm sure you've gotten this a lot because we've heard this a lot. Um, so you indicated in your presentation that people can't consume cannabis in the stores where they purchase it. But we've heard a lot from people we've talked to. I know I've heard people ask the questions on the radio shows when you've had call-in shows yourself. So there's a lot of interest in having cannabis accessible in bars, restaurant, and even like cannabis-specific lounges. Um, do you see this as something that, might happen in the future or?
I can definitely see it happening in the future, but it's going to take a lot of work, and a lot of regulation, not just on the provincial side, but the federal side as well, because it's going to have to be rolled out equally right across the country. Um, and in terms of restaurants, I mean, it's something that I thought about early on when we were first looking at the regulations and looking at what other jurisdictions were doing. But I mean, if you're a restaurateur and you want to offer a cannabis meal, we'll say, you would have to ensure the content of THC and CBD in your food products, right? So you have to know what's in that product and be able to verify that to your customers, or else it's going to create a real mess when it comes to people consuming too much, especially anyone who's a new user. Like Taylor said, start low and go slow. So if I'm a new cannabis consumer and I walk into a high-end cannabis restaurant and I order a meal and then don't know what I'm getting and end up consuming too much, I mean, it's concerning. Um, yeah, so from that perspective alone, it's a little ways off, and it would be some cost to the restaurant as well. It's not just like a regular food product that anybody can consume, right?
No, it does seem like there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into to making that uh, a safe environment for the consumer and for anybody else who might be in the store. I don't know if Taylor or Paul have comments on that. Like Paul, in the US, have we seen more of this type of cannabis being offered and how they're handling those issues?
I think the fact that in Colorado, after 7 years, they haven't quite figured it out speaks to Ryan's comment of it's really tricky. And so the first proposals for the city of Denver had extremely high ventilation and other equipment requirements. The setbacks from any school, daycare, park, church basically left no part of the city that could host such a thing. And then you weren't going to be allowed to sell any products there. People had to bring their own products, which kind of
Yeah.
adds another hurdle for anyone to actually make it, something they would want to do. So I think, yeah, it's complicated, but I think again, I mentioned Las Vegas, so they also have this pressure because if people come there and purchase, but they don't have anywhere in a hotel room or a public space to consume, where do they go? In the parking lot behind the building, or as they walk down the street, and which are also not legal. So I think, as a tourism destination, they have that desire to figure out, and obviously there's an interest, so they may be a place that's more motivated to push it through, because in Colorado I think it's just collapsed under its challenge. The first few go rounds, they're on like round 3 of that now, and slowly getting there. But again, they've figured this out for alcohol in lots of jurisdictions around having a tasting room at a distillery or a craft brewery, and I guess we also sometimes just picture immediately people smoking cannabis in these places, but it may not be smoking at all, right? It may be some other form. And so it does make it more manageable, maybe if it's not a smoke situation.
Yeah, and but like we've discovered, most people prefer to smoke it, so it's definitely going to be difficult. And I'm not even sure when the law came in where smoking is banned, but it's so normal that no one smokes anymore in public places, especially in Canada and Newfoundland. So that's definitely going to present challenges. I can't see an actual place where you can consume and combust something. It's just not going to happen. I can definitely probably see a lounge that has edibles in other places, or maybe an outdoor area. But I do believe that there is a need for a place for people to come together, commute, and be a community around cannabis. Um, Currently it's, in the back alleys or here or there, which is illegal, but it's people will do it until it's not. So if we create a space for it, then, less illegal stuff will happen. Right now, as it stands, in Newfoundland, you can only consume on your private property. We allow people to purchase it, but then we restrict them to their private property. So, it just seems a little like, and I understand that that's where we need to start. And, but there's definitely has to be some work, but I can also understand some challenges around that.
Yeah, you have to look at it from a business standpoint too. For,
Totally.
say, a lounge that's dedicated to cannabis smoking, I mean, you're talking about a very small percentage of the population. And how is the business going to recoup the cost of starting that and putting in the infrastructure for smoke filtering and all the additional costs that comes to running a lounge type establishment for a very small population?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges, and thank you for raising some of those. It kind of brought to light too, I guess, another follow-up question for you. Some of the barriers that people face. I mean, we all mentioned it, so maybe, a store is not the right solution, or a place where people can consume, but we do have, when you're restricted to your own, when we think of, we talk to a lot of youth and young adults this summer who consume cannabis, and especially for young adults who maybe are in post-secondary, none of them own their own homes for the most part, this age group. So they really have nowhere legal to be able to consume the cannabis that they're legally allowed to buy. How do we address some of these barriers for these age groups, or I mean, not just this age group, but anybody who rents and doesn't have their own property, tourism?
So not to offer a solution, but just to describe that problem more. I was on a panel yesterday for the University of Virginia because our state has just legalized for full use as of July 1st. And we had the equivalent of Ryan for our campus, the head of safety, some physicians. And so because it's still federally illegal, there's no university in the US that will allow students to have cannabis in their dorm room, even if they have a medical card in their state. But yet, if they're over 21, they can have a shelf full of 40 ounces or whatever alcohol they want. And so the head of safety for our college spoke to the fact that they were prepared for a big change. Now that it's been legal, I think the bigger change will probably once it's more commercially available. But in the meantime, he still felt like alcohol was their biggest challenge, on grounds on campus, and that like in the short term they can kind of make do with kind of education and talking, but he feels like over time, as attitudes change towards cannabis, and now that it's legal in the state, it's just going to be a really messy problem for them until there's some sort of federal change. So yeah, I don't think there's any solution here in the U.S. that you can bring up to Canada right now.
I don't know if there's any other talks, if anybody else has something to say on those barriers for
I mean,
some
right now, I just think that it's important for students or people who don't own their home just to, ask their landlord or find a friend that they can go to. That's just what we have to do right now. I know that a lot of students live in residence, but, find someone who lives on University Ave.
That's right. I mean, this industry is still brand new, relatively speaking. So it's going to take time for all this stuff to get worked out and normalized, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly appreciate all the rules and things that have been put in place. I guess now that we're 3 years out, I'm trying to ask the questions to see where do we see this shifting and moving, now that we've identified some of these barriers and issues. So yeah, thanks for your comments on that. This next question I'm going to pose to Taylor. So actually, you raised some really good points. Yesterday, I was part of a webinar series as well, and I heard some of the research going on across the country in terms of cannabis and cannabis policy. And one of the studies in Ontario, they actually looked at consumers' understanding of packaging, so warning labels as well as like the THC concentrations. And they just found a real lack of understanding, a real lack of
Yeah.
clarity. So we're trying to educate the public, start low, go slow, but people don't know what is low, what is slow. They don't know what
Right.
that means.
No, and how
Um,
would they? Because it's never been educated, it's never been talked about, and people only know what they know about cannabis from what they've been taught a long time ago, which for me, it was cannabis is bad and it's the devil's lettuce or it's this or that. So it sticks with you until you're re-educated. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. Thank you for chiming in there. I guess I'm just curious. This is a real problem. We have a real
Yeah.
education problem here. Um, I don't know if you haven't have any tips to how to address this
Well,
in the
it's
industry. You're doing a
funny.
great job, but how do we
Thanks.
transfer that?
I would really love to see the actual packaging. And like, I understand the first go at the packaging with the milligrams per gram. And there's a conversion level between, because everything is measured in milligrams. But again, the consumer understands it as percentages. Right before I did this, 10 minutes before, I was actually making sure that I was unsure about the packaging myself because I had to re-educate myself. I'm like, what's this one again? What's that one? And it's confusing. I mean, and I'm in this industry, I'm diving in, and I need to re-educate myself every time I'm reading it. So it's clearer understanding on even just percentage would be great. Like for example, the first THC is called your so cannabis in its flower form has mostly THC in its acid form. So if you physically like ate it, the THC that you would get would be that 0.9%. But then if you use that same cannabis and lit it up and inhaled it, it turns it into a THC, not THCA. So that's where but this is all education that people don't know, right? And that's why there's the total THC value, and I would assume that Health Canada has those two values. Is say if my son took that cannabis package and he ate the whole thing, then okay, worst case scenario, he's getting 0.9% THC or 9.9 milligrams.
Yeah, I think it also just speaks to the fact that the product has all these different forms and all these different uses.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to just simplify it down to like a one-point message. And so that's just a challenge. And at the same time, it's not going to change. So I do think there's a need to just try to go to the next level of conversation, not just kind of good, bad, but like edibles. Let's talk about the pros and cons and the differences. Flower, you can imagine what Taylor was talking about, situations where flower could be more dangerous because it's not really dosed or like quantified at all once you get it out of the package,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be less dangerous because you had to actually combust it to get the effect. And the same with edibles. Edibles could be more dangerous because you can stuff a whole bunch of them in your mouth potentially, or they could be less dangerous because they're generally stay in their childproof package, and each item has a certain known active ingredient. And then I think Ryan did a really good job of just highlighting the fact that as soon as you go to the illegal market, all bets are off, right? The packaging can be super child friendly, knockoffs of familiar trademarks in the gummy, like bear form where the bear is waving at you, versus all the markets I know of, certainly Colorado, Canada, and elsewhere, they don't allow the child appealing presentation, right? And there's a review of that. And, a gummy bear is not something that's allowed in any of these legal markets. Gummies are allowed. And in fact, I think there's a very strong argument why they are, because in Shoppers Drug Mart or at Costco, if you buy your multivitamin, that gummy form is very shelf stable, very precisely controlled, as opposed to like some baked good that one corner has a lot of THC, the other corner doesn't, and right, it's very discreet and can be like put away. So I think some of these things all get lumped together, the illegal with the legal, and like a gummy is automatically a gummy bear when it often, that would be the last thing that's allowed in a legal market. So yeah, I think it's just going to be a process. And I think, as Taylor said, when alcohol first emerged from from the world, or after Prohibition, whatever point you want to start with, right, there would have had to have been a new round of education. The fact that a very strong vodka in a certain quantity is very different than a watered down seltzer or something, and we take a lot of that for granted, and we kind of pick it up more naturally as we grow through teenage years, but yeah, we're starting kind of fresh on cannabis.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think a really good way that Health Canada could to start, because I do understand that the milligrams are, in the total package, but then they can convert that, like put even in brackets behind the 22%, because it's just very, it's like, well, how many milligrams in it? 229%. And people get freaked out and they don't understand. Yeah. So I think maybe that would be a good starting point, just adding the percentage behind it.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully these conversations are already happening, but I
Yeah.
think we definitely need to be talking more about how to make the information understandable. And it's true that we can compare it to alcohol, and there was a lot of education required back then, but we're looking at one substance, and we know cannabis is a much more complex
Hmm.
um, plant, and there's a lot more components. There's a lot more forms that we need to educate the public on. So I can really see how intimidating it can be for a new customer to come in and not know where to start. So I think it just kind of adds to your approach to education and how important that is to kind of really bring consumers up to speed when they're buying a product. All right, so my next question, maybe for Ryan and Taylor, but Paul certainly chime in if you have an answer too. Do you find that the people purchasing in stores are more so the newer cannabis consumers? And how do you think we can get more of those experienced users into the stores? This is kind of more of a general question. Because I know I've heard Ryan say that we still have a fairly
Hmm.
large unlicensed market here in Newfoundland, and so wonder if you have any ideas on that.
Taylor, do you want to take it off
Yeah,
first?
yeah, sure. I was just trying to think of what the alcohol industry is in Newfoundland. I just know that the cannabis industry last year was 53 million. So I know that's a fraction of the alcohol that's consumed in Newfoundland. So that just gives you an idea that it's a fraction of the amount of 19 plus people consuming cannabis. Now, on the retail side of things, we're seeing new people come in every day, and we're also seeing, I guess we'll say new consumers. But we're also seeing, the everyday consumers and the avid, consumers coming in trying it out because it's just becoming more normal. We're seeing it more and more at our Bureau and store because it's been open almost a year. So, when we opened Port aux Basques, I was almost in shock again about the stigma. But I had to remind myself that, wait now, Taylor, it took some months for Bjorn to get this way as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, if we're talking about black market people who've been, say, buying off their drug dealer or their buddy for the last 20 years, that's not my client. They're probably always going to do that. The black market that I really want to stop are the children buying off, or the younger people buying off these illicit um, markets that are not regulated. So I think NLC is really doing a good job with, if you don't see this logo, then it's not legal, or if you don't see this tax stamp, whatever the case. But that's the education that we really need to get across to Newfoundlanders is that, um, products that are in the illegal market are not safe. And the reason why they're not safe, they're either you don't know, it's not regulated, so you don't know what's in there, and it's either there could be 200 milligrams in one brownie. I mean, that's enough for, Health Canada came out with a max of 10 milligrams, and that will do everyone just fine, I promise. So 200 milligrams is really a ride that you don't want to be on.
From my experience, just to go back to the initial question, I've experienced it as a good cross section of long-term cannabis consumers and new users going into the retail stores. I wouldn't have the exact percentage of which is greater, but it seemed to me like even with age groups, there was an excellent cross section between the older generation of people coming in to get their cannabis into the legitimate retail stores and the younger people.
Yeah, I would agree.
And something that I heard really early on from the retailers themselves, a large percentage of customers that were coming in were asking medical questions about the products.
Mm-hmm.
And we discussed this early on in the CHERP group, Jennifer. Yeah, so really they were coming in to get their medical questions answered when it comes
Yeah.
to access to cannabis, or there was a middle-aged person coming into the stores to buy something for their elderly parents who wanted to try cannabis for pain relief,
Right.
or something like that. And I heard all kinds of stories about that right from legalization. So
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating for us because, and they just, customers don't know this either, but I mean, you can imagine, and this is how I describe it when I'm, training any staff. I'm like, you can imagine if Nan, someone comes in and says, "Oh, my knee's hurting," and you talk to them about their knee, and then they go home and smoke the whole joint and have a terrible time, probably call the ambulance, like it could blow up real bad when you're not a medical professional. So, we truly stay away from that. We have, I have a full card of sayings that we say back to them. But even if we say it over and over and over, consumers and customers will just continue to say, well, but it really hurts. I heard that this will help. I'm like, well, you can do your own research. This is what we have in stock. And this is the price. We just have to talk facts.
And I think it illustrates again, this mixed bag kind of situation where, like, how great that in Canada there's a mail order option for medical use across the country, and also some mail order within certain provinces like Newfoundland. That's very convenient. Someone who's in an isolated location or who knows what they want and can plan ahead. But then also, what a challenge if you have what you think of as a pressing medical concern and you're told, like, you got to go and order and wait for it to be delivered. I just want something right now. And so that's one situation. And then, I think in most of our US states, there's something called medical cannabis, but it's not particularly medical, or you get a card once a year and then you're sent off on your own, and no one's with the medical training is there to guide you. You're hoping maybe the retail person has some knowledge of what you want them to know, or you're just figuring it out for yourself. And so so that's not ideal either, but there is no mail order option in most of these locations. So there's little bits and pieces that I think we can kind of, if you cobble it together, you could make like a little improvement in both spots by learning from the other, probably.
Just something one of you mentioned about just bringing a couple of things together. First, around the mail order, because yes, we do have that available here in Canada. It's available for medical purposes. It's within the provinces you can do mail order, but there's also a lot of unlicensed mail order cannabis retailers across the country as well. We know about the symbol you see on the websites or in the store, so we know that this is a licensed store or retailer. So is the excise stamp the best way? Like, is that the one clue that we can tell people to differentiate between their licensed and unlicensed products that they purchase?
Well, I said it in one of my early slides. Anything that you order online from outside Newfoundland, Labrador is illegal. The only legitimate websites that you can buy non-medical products from here are Tier 1 locations and NLC's own Shop Cannabis NL site. And anecdotally, I think the most part of buyers just didn't realize.
Yeah, we get. Sorry, Ryan. We get a lot of customers come in and believe that they're buying legitimate legal products, and we have to educate them. It's like, no, that's not legal. Anything, especially a lot of on the edible side, they almost fight us on, well, why is it only 10 milligrams? I get it online for 25 milligrams per gummy, and I get 10 in a pack. Like, well, that's highly illegal, and they're like, well, no, it says that it's, it comes with all the warnings, comes with all this, and it's, I guess the illicit market is just getting smarter. But essentially for Newfoundlanders, we just need to buy at our own stores or Shop Cannabis NL.
Well, if I'm John Q. Public, I'm opening up my web browser and I'm going to Google cannabis. What pops up? A list of illegal sites. And I'm in Canada, cannabis is legal now, so I can order from anywhere.
Yeah.
I think what those study findings I showed from New Brunswick remind you of is, one, all the contaminants, right? That's not something that the average person has any way to be sure of. But it was very clear cut between the two sources where you're finding those contaminants. But then on the potency part, like to Taylor's comment earlier, yeah, maybe the black market product is much higher in THC, like 200 versus 20. It also could be the opposite. It's like basically none, or like a tiny bit compared to what you thought you were paying for. And that's part of what their results showed too. And so, so again, over time, people will start to figure this out. But I think, as you say, the websites look legit. You make the order. By the time it arrives, you've already spent money and it's in your hands. What are you going to do at that point? It's a challenging situation.
But To get back to your question, Jennifer, the legitimate products are easily identifiable as legitimate products. There's a uniform appearance to all the packaging. They'll have the producer listed on it, where it was manufactured, when it was manufactured. It will be in full compliance with the Health Canada regulations, so it'll have the health warnings on it, keep out of the reach of children, and it will have contact information. So if you have a problem with the product, you have a number or an address to send information to, or a web address to contact the company about this product. The illegal products won't have that.
And I think the key is just to making sure the public is aware of what to look for on a package to know that that's a licensed product. So okay, it is it is a 1:51 here now. We're almost finished. Thank you guys so much. I'm gonna have one last question just to kind of clue things up, and then we'll finish up for the day. So thank you guys for all of your incredible insights. My last question is very general. I just want your thoughts on how you think the cannabis retail environment might evolve over the next 3 years or into the future. So I know we've touched on a bit of this already, but where do you think is the next big change and shift? Maybe I'll start with Taylor.
I guess I just see it evolving. I mean, I see it every day evolving to be becoming more normalized and more people feeling more comfortable. And that's ultimately what I want to see. I want to see people incorporating cannabis into their daily lifestyle for wellness, not medical, but for wellness, and allowing people to understand cannabis. So, I just truly see as time goes on, more people will actually feel more comfortable going into stores, and ultimately they'll get educated and realize that this is just a normal thing.
Excellent. Ryan?
You know, like I said before, it's a brand new industry, and we're all just getting used to it. I mean, we're only a few years in, but it'll open up slowly. There's nothing really to compare it to, because when alcohol first became a controlled substance and legalized, we'll say, it was already a big part of the culture, and everybody was accessing it anyway. It's just that laws were created around it. But for this industry, I can imagine within 10 years or so, the regulations will get more lax when it comes to promotions and things like that. But the core regulations to protect consumers and young people and things like that, I think that stuff will always be in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with those comments. The two things I would add, one is the Cannabis Act at the national level is undergoing review, and so I think that may drive some changes. Probably not that'll be obvious to the consumers the next day, but they may affect the producers, LPs side of the world, maybe product options over the next little while. So that could be something that kind of comes into Newfoundland from outside. But yeah, otherwise, I'm totally on the same page as your other panelists. I think it's just an evolution little by little. I know personally, and this came up, as I said yesterday in my other panel discussion, the way that cannabis is viewed relative to the other substances, alcohol, tobacco, prescription drugs, pharmaceuticals. I think that over time is kind of what I've, probably not in 3 years, but over a longer window, what I would hope to see is kind of more normalization within that mix, and having a more balanced discussion about all of them. And I think, again, Newfoundland is not in a bad spot to be part of that, because some of the oversight is shared across alcohol and cannabis for one. So yeah, so hopefully that's part of it as well. But it does take time, not only on the regulatory side, but as we've mentioned, the average person, they've been told one story about cannabis for a long time, and there was some element of truth to that story, and now they're being faced with a different story that's a lot more complicated and has some truth in there and a lot of myth as well. So.
Yeah, and I would like just to add to what you were saying about the review on the Cannabis Act. If there's one change that I would love to see in the retail side of things, of course, knowing that we can't talk medical at all, but I would love to be able to talk about the effects, and I think that could be married with more information about the terpene profile. So I'd love to be able to at least let consumers know the typical effects that this strain may have compared to that strain. Whether it makes you, more energetic or more of this or more of that. Right now, we're really restricted on how we can chat about that. So yeah, I would love to see that change in the in the new review.
Excellent. So some great comments there. Thank you all. I guess we'll just wrap things up now. Thank you so much, Taylor, Ryan, Paul, for all of your comments and insights and being able to answer all the questions today. I know I've learned from you guys. I hope our audience has learned from you guys as well. Also, thank you to anybody attending. Thank you for joining us. This will be available as a recording afterwards, so we can share it to anybody who wasn't able to attend live. Just a reminder that this is the first of 4 of our Cannabis Crossroads webinar series. They'll be every second Wednesday. And so our next one is on cannabis in the workplace. We have another one on cannabis and driving, and we have another one focused on medical uses for cannabis. So hopefully you guys will be able to attend those as well. And I also just want to give a final shout out and thank you to Dina, who has been in charge of organizing all this. She's done an incredible amount of work, as well as Sandy Brennan, Sandy Schumacher, and Maria Josie, who've been all summer behind the scenes preparing for this event. So thank you all. And we'll end it there, and hopefully we'll see you all again in 2 weeks' time.